you excited about learning how to navigate and study an unexciting brick of paper and all about federal aviation regulations? Well, stick around anyway, because, well, I could really use your company here. But chances are, you're looking to study about the federal aviation regulations, and this book right here is the most popular source to do just that. However, as you can see, it is a hefty publication, so we'll break it down so it's easier to understand without getting lost in the endless pages with no colorful pictures to cheer us up while studying. This video was created with the intent to help student pilots prepare for their private pilot practical exam. Since the practical exam is open book for everyone, aim to be familiar with understanding and navigating through the contents of this book, just so you don't have to struggle with a question where the answer may be just sitting in front of you. Tips and suggestions for preparing in the practical exam will also be included all throughout the video. And lastly, at the very end, there will be a handful of practice questions to test your understanding and get you to practice using your book to search for answers to potential questions. Already taken your check ride? Please comment below what FAR you were tested on that was not listed in the suggested study list that we're about to look at shortly. By now you may already have this book lying around, which is a good start, but if you don't have one yet, find one immediately. To get one, these books are easily available in print at various online pilot shops and flight schools as well. Generally, they're priced at a little under $20 a copy. At any higher price, you would be overpaying. Also, if a digital version suits you better, a free PDF version is available online as well. The link to both the Code of Federal Aviation Regulations and the Aeronautical Information Manual will be found in the description box below. Another side note, I'm pretty sure you already figured this out by now, but the Code of Federal Aviation Regulations is often abbreviated to CFR or FAR for obvious reasons, and also with the Aeronautical Information Manual, that's also shortened to AIM or AIM. I will use these abbreviations from now on in the video so I don't forget how to breathe, and you won't believe how many times I had to re-record these voiceovers. Thank goodness for video editing. Now finally looking at the book itself, we'll begin by looking at how it is divided into both the FAR and AIM sections. Here at the table of contents, we'll see that the beginning portion is dedicated to the FARs, which is numerically listed in ascending order by their part and section numbers. And at the bottom we find the AIM section, which is an encyclopedia for pilots and touches more on information about procedures, guidelines, and much more. Unlike the FARs, the AIM is organized by chapters, which the subject areas covered by each chapter is listed at the table of contents at the beginning of the AIM section. Essentially here, we're looking at two books printed into one. Starting with the cover, my first tip for those particularly taking a pilot practical exam is that you want to make sure all your materials are current. This includes your charts, chart supplements, weather information and briefings, etc. And your FAR AIM here is no exception. Make sure your FAR AIM book version is for the current year you're taking your exam. Any outdated material makes a very poor impression to your examiner, and it would definitely be worth the money to go purchase current versions. Also, the print version for the future following year is usually released a few months before the current year is even finished. At the time of filming this video, the 2021 print version is already made available. This is just something to keep in mind as you prepare your materials for your exam. Good news is that not all the information in this book will apply to private pilots, so we will identify the areas that are relevant and what is recommended to study in preparation for the exam. Conveniently, there's this study list here right at the beginning of the book. It includes topics from both the FARs and AIM. Just on the other page, we find the Private and Recreational Pilots Study Guide. Both of these types of pilots have a lot of overlap in the subjects required to study, so they are blended into one list for study. Since it looks like already at this point the video will be at least 30 minutes long, and I don't want you to have to watch a marathon about this, so I will go through every single individual FAR up until part 91, which is right where my thumb is at right now, and then follow up with some practice questions to test your ability to fully use this book, no matter which part you will need to refer to. Now here we're looking at the complete suggested study list for the private and recreational pilot. So we'll start at the top left corner under FAR Part 1, and it's suggesting 1.1 and 1.2. So we'll flip right through that book and see what we find. Starting with the table of contents page, we will find Part 1 listed at the very top and right on the following page after that. So here we have Part 1, and it is titled as Definitions and Abbreviations, so you can tell this is an area where it's serving as a very small dictionary related to aviation terminology. However, I want you to keep in mind this is definitely not a comprehensive one. You will find better definitions illustrated with examples in your textbooks or internet, but at least it's good to know that you have something here. As you see on the next page, it already begins with Part 43, so it's just a few pages, lacking a lot of diagrams, which is very helpful in learning and memorize terminology, especially with aviation having its own language. So I don't recommend this as your first source for definitions. Next on the suggested study list, we have Part 21 and Part 39. It seems that it just doesn't exist anywhere in the book, so I'm not sure why that is even included in the list. But I searched these items on the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations and found that Part 21 is titled Certification Procedures for Products and Articles. Part 21, Section 181 falls under airworthiness certificates and is specifically about duration. Next I found with Part 39 was titled Airworthiness Directives, and Part 39, Section 3 was named as Definition of Airworthiness Directives. Along with the definition, I recommend to study more about them, including how to look them up for an aircraft and its maintenance logs to check for how it would be compliant. I hope that helped lead you to the right areas to study in response to the lack of information on that in this book. If you would like to check the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations, the link to the page is available in the description box of this video. Next part in the suggested study list is Part 43, which is all about maintenance, preventative maintenance, rebuilding, and alteration. The study list said to learn all of this part in its entirety, and in my opinion that sounds a bit excessive for a private pilot practical exam. But we can summarize and pick through the information that is most likely to be relevant to you as a future private pilot. For example, study how it applies, who can perform preventative maintenance, especially since a private pilot would qualify in that area of work. Also understand what information would have to be documented in the aircraft maintenance logs. Also know examples of specific types of work done on an aircraft that are recognized as preventative maintenance and what work is not. In general, the rest of this part is much more in depth about the topic of maintenance than what is usually in the realm of a private pilot, but at least take a glance through every page here so you are familiar with what kind of information is available here, just in case you need to refer to it in the future. Next up on our list is Part 61, titled Certification for Pilots, Flight Instructors, and Ground Instructors. And the certification information includes pilots of all kinds, from sport, commercial, airline transport, helicopter, and more. Of course, for the purpose of this video, we will focus on the private pilot information here. Part 61 is described in simple terms all about how to get a pilot license and the paperwork involved in being a pilot. There are many rules in this area, so we will get started on the first item on the list, which is Part 61.3. After flipping over a few pages, we will eventually find 61.3 titled Requirement for Certificates, Ratings, and Authorizations. Note that this section is about what documents the pilot is required to have in physical possession while operating an aircraft. This is not where you will find the requirements to get the pilot certificate itself, as that will come in at a later point in the video. Okay, I can't believe it took me this long to realize that I could just highlight my book so it's easier for you to see what and where I'm talking about. Like, wow, almost a genius here. By the way, this is my first video I'm making for YouTube, so I've been really figuring things out as I go, hence the awkward vibes from the video, or maybe it's just me. I think it's just me. But I just got excited about the highlighting idea to make things a little more obvious for you, so from now on I will keep on highlighting, and feel free to join in on doing the same with your book as well. So let's get back to vandalizing. So with 6115, this section includes information about offenses involving alcohol or drugs. Basically, it's sobering news here. With the way the regulations are, even though a DUI can occur with you being nowhere near an aircraft, remember that it is important to know that your automobile driving records and activity is linked to your status as a pilot. And though it's not included in the suggested study list, I also highlighted 6116 as I think it's closely related to 6115 with consequences for pilots and substance use. In 6123, we have the section on medical certificates with their durations and class requirements for various types of flight operations. This is a popular topic in the written exam, so if you have already completed that exam, this may be a review for you. If you take a look at the table listing the durations for the different medical certificate classes, you will see that they expire based on the calendar months after the date of the examination. Age does play a role in determining each certificate's duration. For example, if you are 40 years or older and completed a first-class medical examination during any day in the month of February, the 6-month count begins in the following month of March and continues with the next 5 months up to August, and the expiration day will be the last day of August. At that point, the certificate would revert to second-class privileges. Let's quiz on a scenario where, say you just got your first-class medical certificate and your 40th birthday is on the following week from the date of the examination. Would your medical certificate revert to a second class after 6 months or 12 months? Since you did turn 40 years shortly after getting your medical certificate. The key here is that the certificate expires after the month of the date of the examination indicated on the medical certificate. So in this scenario, you would have your first class medical certificate privileges 12 months. Moving on to 6131, type rating requirements, additional training, and authorization requirements. On the following pages here, as soon as I get to them, we get to admire some more highlighting action here. This section has multiple key information for qualifying to operate different kinds of aircraft. Be sure to know this regulation well, as it is very likely the examiner will want to discuss the different scenarios for flying different aircraft, and whether you would need additional training or if your current experience may suffice for a particular aircraft in the discussions. You will see I highlighted the area regarding additional training for operating complex airplanes. Make sure you know what makes an aircraft complex, at least in the legal terms, since its definition is not present here. It's not always about a ton of switches and buttons in the cockpit, but you need to remember that a complex airplane has all three elements, which are retractable landing gear, flaps, and a variable pitch propeller. Unlike the complex portion, the high-performance airplane area has included a definition for what makes an airplane to be considered high performance. The definition has been underlined here. I do not know why this got a definition and the complex one did not, but I just wanted to point that out so you know that throughout this book there's a lot of information put together in one spot, while other areas require you to look elsewhere for clarification. Next item on the list, we have part 6156, all about flight reviews. This is the regulation that mandates a flight review to be completed if a pilot wishes to continue to exercise the pilot privileges. Here we find information on the requirements on how to complete a flight review and how and who they apply to. Just on a small side note, it's still surprising how many people's logbooks I find missing an overdue flight review entry, only to find some pilots out there flying unaware of this rule or just completely forgot. Just remember, flight reviews, due every 24 calendar months. Not 23, not 25, not 100, but 24 little calendar months. And stay on track with those little calendar months because they tend to slip away faster than you think. Time flies. Okay, moving on is 6157 for recent flight experience. This is different from the flight review as it applies to pilots wishing to take passengers and also for night flying, which you have to perform the listed tasks and log them within the last 90 days, not months, but days. Be careful to know the differences in the requirements for being current for each flight condition, as there's a lot of subtle yet key differences. With 6160, you need to update the FAA every time you change your permanent mailing address. Failure to do so after 30 days of the relocation will cause a pilot to lose the privileges of his or her license. Here in this paragraph, they explain how you can update them in writing with a provided address in Oklahoma. Yeah, we don't have time for that. You can make all those updates online on the FAA website at faa.gov. So I have no idea why that option isn't mentioned in the regulation. I think it's tragic. Maybe the FAA likes paperwork too much? I don't know. In 6169, it's all about towing gliders and what you need to do for that. I remember being asked this one on my own practical exam, so this one may be a common question used for testing still. So learn what this one's all about and what you need to do to be able to legally do this. As a little side note I want to add here is that just because a regulation listed here may happen to relate to a form of flying that you would not be interested in at all, it is very important that you study these regulations anyway, especially in preparation for your practical exam. So simply telling your examiner that you're not familiar with a particular regulation because you will not participate in glider towing or flying larger pressurized aircraft, for example, this will usually not be a successful response to the question. And since at this point we are starting to talk about regulations on how to be able to fly different types of aircraft and types of flying as well, I remembered when I was studying for my own practical exam, I had a really hard time committing to learning to those many rules for the types of flying that I just didn't see myself having the opportunity to do in the near future, or maybe even in the far future possibly. So I was always struggling with the thought of, why do I have to learn all this information that I won't probably be using anyways? At the time, I just wanted to rent the aircraft available at my own flight school, fly local flights, and be as basic as possible, you know? So if you ever come to a point in your studying and feel the struggle to learn and memorize so much, I get you. Just remember this little ramble about how you need to know or show the examiner your awareness of the numerous privileges as well as the numerous limitations that come with your private pilot certificate. And then after you pass the test, of course you're not expected to know everything by then, but as a pilot you are expected to verify your flight situations and also know where to go for accurate answers and information. Going from student pilot to private pilot, the responsibility transitions more to now you being your own examiner and knowing where to look for the information you will need to know as you continue your flying experience. And at this point I catch myself thinking, stay alive, have fun, and keep your pilot's license. Those are my priorities. And not in that particular order. Safety's obvious. You know what I mean. Okay, on the move to 6195, operation in Class B airspace and at airports located within Class B for student pilots. Since as a private pilot you will be able to operate in these airspaces without limitations, as you would as a student pilot, you may be asked on the subject as a straightforward question, or you might be asked to apply this knowledge by demonstrating the airspace and the operations on a sectional chart during the practical exam. Next item in the suggested study list was 61101, which is for recreational pilot privileges and limitations, which would not apply to us, so disregard this one and move on to 61113, private pilot privileges and limitations. Have a thorough understanding what the private pilot can and cannot do, as it is not always so simple. Scenario-based questions are often used to get you to think and apply the rules as we are looking at here. Say a curious friend wants you to fly him up to a small local airport and offer you $30 for that favor. Would you violate any regulations here? How about if you decide to split the aircraft operating costs between a group of friends? Is there any way to do that legally? How would it be done? Or would you one day participate as a pilot in a charitable event? Because there's plenty of opportunities to do that as well. Though I didn't see this one listed in the suggested study list, I recommend you look over the eligibility requirements for taking a private pilot practical exam. This one is found under Part 61-103. I remember this one being asked during my exam, and many other students agree as well. And lastly, for Part 61, I also want to recommend taking a close look at Part 61-109, listed as Aeronautical Experience. Here we see what kind of flight experience and time required to test and qualify for a private pilot certificate. I included this as a part of the suggested studies because, though it rarely happens, humans make errors, and occasionally there are students who show up to their practical exam only to find out with their examiner that they are short of like 0.2 hours of a cross-country flight or nighttime flight experience logged in their logbook. So I recommend that you do your best to avoid experiencing that on your own exam, and check through each item and make sure you verify your logbook for completion. Let's now take a look at Part 71. The list suggests we take a look at 71.5 and 7171. At a glance, it looks like it relates to airspace, service routes, and reporting points. I personally don't think this area will be very helpful to you in your studies. Instead, with regards to airspace, I recommend you refer to your textbooks for this subject, where it's much better explained and easier to understand with pictures and diagrams. Or you can at least have a better learning experience about the airspaces in this book by going to Chapter 3 in the AIM instead. In that part of the book, there's a little bit more visuals that relate to explaining airspace, and by little I mean like one simple diagram and a table listing VFR weather minimums. So in conclusion, don't use this book to learn airspace really. There's much better sources out there for this subject, such as the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. By the way, the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge is also available for free in the PDF version at the FAA website. So just in case you want to take a look there for this subject, go ahead and do that, and then we'll move on to the next part. Now we finally come to Part 91, which is titled as General Operating and Flight Rules. At this point, I would like you to continue what we have been doing so far by going through each item in the suggested study list and finding them in the book. With Part 91, I looked through each one in the list, and they did a good job picking the ones that are relevant to the private pilot. No regulation in there was like way out there or missing in the book like we found with both Part 21 and 39. So do go through it and read through the rest of the FARs suggested in the list. Highlight, mark, tab, or do whatever you need to do to help yourself organize and customize your FAR AIM book to best serve you. I originally thought maybe I'll make a video of how I would vandalize my own book for studying purposes, but I realized everyone out there has their own unique way of learning, so I'll leave that part up to you. As you finish through the Part 91 portion of the list, you will see up next is called NTSB, which stands for National Transportation Safety Board, all about accident and incident reporting. This subject is included in the written exams and likely also at some point asked during a practical exam. So other than that, we hope you don't have to use this knowledge, but it is important. This part is a very small section in the book, and it begins right after Part 142. In the 2020 FAR AIM edition, it happens to be on page 545. Since it's only about 4 pages long, it's not difficult to miss. I remember when I was looking for it for the first time, I thought I was missing some pages in my book, but it just turned out I was overreacting. A little note in here is if you happen to notice in some areas throughout this book, there are these little black vertical lines adjacent to the text. These indicate areas that are new updates since the last printing of this book. Usually most of the information stays quite consistent on average, but if you notice something that has a line like these, you can pay attention to the changes if it's in an area that applies to you. I'm trying to find a good example of these lines to show you, but now that I'm actually looking for one, I'm kind of struggling, but let's see if I can find one. Oh, now that's what I'm talking about. So what do we have here? Special Federal Aviation Regulations number 113, prohibition against certain flights in the Simferopol Flight Information Region and the Dnipropetrovsk. Okay, I'll just not go there. Next. And when you finally arrive to the AIM portion of the suggested study list, I want to say I don't think it's the best source to study from when it comes to preparing for a practical exam. It has a lot of great information, but I like to read it when I'm feeling bored and want to feel even more bored. When it comes to learning about topics covered in this section, I recommend referring to the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge instead. That one is a great textbook for pilots and includes helpful pictures and diagrams, and it's also written in a very reader-friendly level. The AIM also includes almost all the same subjects as the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge, but I find the AIM feels more like reading a dictionary than a textbook, and is very minimal with diagrams and pictures to help visualize the information. However, I do like the AIM section on airport lighting, markings, and signs. They do cover everything on that topic. Ready for a few practice questions? Just like the practical exam, let's do this open book and get ready to search for the answers in your FAR AIM. First question is, at what altitude does supplemental oxygen become required for both crew and passengers? And remember, if you don't understand a question or need clarification during your practical exam, ask the examiner if they can reword their question in any way. Sometimes a simple misunderstanding can get you headed in the wrong direction from the answer the examiner is actually looking for. Since this question is asking about a requirement pertaining to supplemental oxygen, it sounds like we are being pointed to the regulations. So we will already know that we will be looking for the answer in the first half of the book. Since supplemental oxygen doesn't sound relevant to any regulation as to how to get certified as a pilot, we know that Part 61 is already eliminated from potentially having the answer. So let's take a look at the next big part, Part 91, General Operating and Flight Rules. We can start at the beginning with the first page from the table of contents to see where within Part 91 will be related to this question. So right now I'm just skimming through item by item to see where I will find information to this question, and I don't expect you to be reading on this screen with me. Please follow along with your book as we search together. So far I don't see it on this page yet, but we'll keep on going. And then looking on this page, I see subpart C, equipment, instrument, and certificate requirements. That sounds like we're getting a little closer, and again, going item by item, reading through, I see supplemental oxygen right here. It looks like 91-11 sounds pretty promising. That looks like a potential, so let's flip over there and see what we find. Now, I know with the post-it note, I'm trying to obviously pretend like this is my first time searching for it, but here we have 91-11. Now you see this section has multiple layers as to how this regulation will apply. We have at various altitudes and the requirements varying with them. This regulation starts to kick in for the required minimum flight crew at 12,500 feet above mean sea level, and depending on the flight duration above that altitude. The question, however, asked when both pilots and passengers are required to have supplemental oxygen. So looking further down in this rule, we find that it states at cabin pressure altitudes above 15,000 feet MSL, each occupant needs to be provided with supplemental oxygen. Note the slight difference in wording with this regulation here. It states that for the flight crews, they need to be provided with and use the supplemental oxygen, while each occupant, passengers essentially, only needs to be provided with the oxygen. But the regulation doesn't require them to use it like the pilots are. So if you as the pilot ever find yourself with passengers who are uncomfortable or unable to use the provided oxygen, or just want to pass out, they have the power to make that decision. Let's try another question. Let's say after a long day of work, a pilot comes to find that a coworker ate his lunch while he was away. The hangry pilot decided to take an opportunity by positioning his aircraft so that the prop blast was aimed at the coworker lunch thief as he unsuspectingly walked by. After succeeding in teaching him a lesson, did the pilot violate any regulation here? No one got hurt, and they all had a good laugh after the pilot shut down the engine. Alright, let's see if we can sue this pilot. Like the previous question, it sounds like this one has more relevance to Part 91 than 61. So heading back to that table of contents page, let's start by scanning through these sections one at a time. Careless or reckless operation? Looks like 9113 may be a potential, so we'll start by looking over there and then see what we can find. Here it looks like this scenario might relate to section 9113. It clearly says no person may operate an aircraft in a careless or reckless manner so as to endanger the life or property of another. So this leaves a little space for interpretation, but this is a good spot to practice common sense and act so that there is minimal possibility of getting reported for reckless or careless operations. So moral of the story, stay safe, eat lots of food, and don't be a hangry pilot. This is pretty similar to the next section right below about dropping objects, though you can legally drop objects from an aircraft provided that reasonable precautions are taken to avoid injury or damage to persons or property. Again, since it's not specifically spelled out with what counts as reasonable precaution, common sense is very helpful here too. Oh, and same for the section below that one also. Last question. What is the minimum recommended distance to fly from a thunderstorm? That's so cute! I drew that. Since this question was asking for a recommended distance, it doesn't sound like it's necessarily a regulation question, so let's try looking into the AIM section for this one and see what we have there. With the AIM, we'll use the same method to search for the answer just like we did with the FARs. So turning over a few pages, we'll eventually arrive at the table of contents area, and we'll start looking through each chapter and seeing what it's all about. Chapter 1 with air navigation doesn't sound very relevant to weather, neither does Chapter 2 with aeronautical lighting, so we'll keep flipping over to the next page. Still nothing much here. So did you find it yet? It looks like we finally started coming up to meteorology up in Chapter 7, so we must be getting close at this point. Sorry, I had the camera pointed in the wrong direction. Maybe potential flight hazards? That sounds like it could be, but I don't see anything really about thunderstorms. And finally, after much looking, there's thunderstorms and thunderstorm flying at 7-1-28 and 7-1-29. Let's have a look over there. The way the AIM is organized is at the top of every page, they have the chapter number followed by the section number followed by the topic number, I guess. So that's how I found 7-1-29, which we see here is thunderstorm flying. I recommend you read through every point they have here. It's very helpful information. And then as you go through each item, you'll eventually come to where they recommend a particular distance to fly away or have a distance in between a severe thunderstorm or a cell that's giving an intense radar echo. And there we have our answer. Looks like thunderstorms aren't that cute after all. Bonus question. Do you know your hand signals? Well, I waited too long to learn that, and I felt dumb when I was staring at a guy and wondering, oh gosh, I wish I knew what he means by that dance move. This knowledge will come in handy when you start exploring new destinations. As they always say, when in doubt, ask. Or if on the ground, probably better just to shut down your engine if you're already parked on a ramp. So I hope this video helped you learn something new. A lot of this is stuff I wish I had known much earlier in my own training when I was a student. And I had a lot of fun making this video as my first time on YouTube. I'm open to making more videos like these if you would like, so I'll be watching and keeping track how these responses go if that's something that would interest and benefit the community here. And if you're preparing for your exam, best of luck, and I wish you good and cooperative weather for your flight. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and congratulations on surviving it too. I know regulations are not the most thrilling topic in aviation, but we'll have another topic coming up, so I'll see you in the next video.